Wyoming Territory, 1881, the wind carried the scent of dry sage and wood smoke as Elira Ames stood on her porch, arms crossed tight over her chest, hunger curling deep in her belly. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. The hens had stopped laying, the last of the flour was gone, and the creek out back had frozen solid overnight. Snow had come early this year, and with it, the whispers. They said she'd starve without a husband, the storekeeper's wife had muttered just loud enough for Elira to hear last week. Pride does not fill a stomach. Elira had not answered. She had just turned away, her chin high, her spine stiff. Even when her stomach growled loud enough to echo in her quiet cabin, she did not regret refusing the marriage proposals offered out of pity or land greed. She had managed fine for the first 2 years after her father passed planting, harvesting, mending, surviving. But this winter had come hard and early, and now survival felt like a thread unraveling fast. She scanned the white horizon. Nothing but snow and bare cottonwoods, then hooves. A single rider was coming down the ridge trail, not a neighbor, not anyone from town. The figure was too tall, too straight in the saddle. The horse was a big, dark sorrel, and the man wore a brown trail coat, the collar turned up against the wind. Elira's pulse kicked up. She stepped off the porch, boots crunching over icy dirt. The rider slowed as he neared the cabin. "You Elira Ames?" His voice was steady, low. "I am." She kept her tone even wary. He dismounted with ease. "Name's Deacon O'Rourke." He untied something from the back of his saddle and walked forward, holding it out, a burlap sack. She caught the smell of smoked meat and coffee. "I was headed back from the logging camp near Laramie, got caught in that storm 2 nights ago. Took the old trail down past your place, saw smoke, figured someone might be needing this more than me." Elira stared at the sack. Her pride rose up like a wall, but hunger cracked it. Her hand shook slightly as she took it. "There's venison jerky, cornmeal, beans, coffee too." She met his eyes. They were gray-blue like mountain ice. "Why would you give a stranger your food?" "Because I do not need it half as bad as you do." He glanced at the thin smoke curling from her chimney. "And because I was raised better." She hesitated, then stepped back. "You can come in. Warm yourself." Inside, the cabin was clean but bare. The hearth burned low. A single quilt hung over the window. She set the sack on the table and went to stoke the fire. Deacon stood just inside the door, removing his gloves. He looked around, taking in the empty shelves, the single chair, the worn Bible on the mantel. Elira turned, brushing her hands on her skirt. "I have not had company in a while, I can tell." He offered a small smile. "Do you live out here alone?" She nodded. "My father passed in 79. I stayed. It is my land. Brave of you." She gave a dry laugh. "Foolish, some would say." He shrugged off his coat and hung it by the door. "Sometimes it is the same thing." They ate together that night quietly. He boiled beans in her pot, added dried meat, brewed strong coffee. Elira watched him move efficient, calm, and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Safe, when they finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You live nearby. I am out of Cheyenne. Usually ride lines for the cattle company, but I am between contracts." Elira nodded slowly. "You could have sold that food in town." "I could have, but I did not." She studied him for a long beat. "Thank you." He met her gaze. "You do not owe me thanks. You just looked like you needed help." That night, he slept in the barn beside his horse. Elira offered him a blanket and a lantern, and he took both with a quiet nod. She could not sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind push against the walls. The food in her belly made her ache with relief, and the stranger's voice stayed in her mind, steady, kind. They said she would starve without a husband, but the cowboy had brought food. In the morning, she found him already splitting logs out back, snow dusted on his shoulders. "You did not have to do that," she said. He looked up, breath fogging. "I know." She watched him for a moment. "You planning on riding out today?" "I was thinking I might stay a day or two. Snow's thick up on the ridge. Trail might be better if I wait." She nodded once. "You are welcome." They worked side by side that day. He cleared the path to the woodshed. She boiled more beans, now with salt and a pinch of wild thyme. He fixed the latch on her barn door. She patched his glove. They spoke little, but something passed between them in looks and small gestures. When she stumbled over a patch of ice, he caught her elbow without a word. When he coughed from the cold, she handed him tea without asking. That evening they sat by the fire. She offered him her father's rocking chair. He sat, long legs stretched out, eyes on the flames. Elira leaned against the hearth. "You are not like most men I have met." He looked at her. "Is that good or bad?" "Good." She hesitated. "Most would have left me to starve." He held her gaze. "I am not most." She nodded slowly. "No, you are not." Snow fell again that night, soft and silent. And in the hush that settled over the cabin, Elira realized something. She was no longer alone. And something inside her, something that had been locked away since her father died, began to stir. Not just hope, but warmth. Maybe, just maybe, she was not meant to survive this life all on her own. The snow deepened overnight, blurring the path to the woodshed and silencing the trees until the whole world seemed paused beneath heavy white. Elira rose before first light, her breath visible in the dim cabin air. She dressed by the hearth, careful not to wake Deacon, though she knew he'd be up soon enough. She stepped outside, boots sinking through the top layer of snow. Chickens stirred in the coop, feathers puffed against the cold. She cleared ice from their trough with stiff fingers, working by instinct. The quiet out here was different with another soul nearby. Not less lonely, just less hollow. By the time the sun broke through, Deacon was already leading his horse down to the creek to check the ice. Elira watched him from the window. He walked like someone who trusted the ground beneath his feet, even when it was frozen and treacherous. When he came back in, he brushed snow from his hat and set it carefully by the door. "Creek solid, better water from the melt near the bend." She nodded once. "There's a pail behind the stove." He filled it without being asked, setting it beside the fire to warm. Then he stood there as if weighing something. "You ever trap?" he asked. Elira glanced up from the hearth. "No, I never learned. There's rabbit sign along the tree line." "I could set a few snares, might be a stew in it." Her gaze lingered on him. "You do that?" "I'm not planning to ride out with the worst of the cold coming. Might as well be useful." She hesitated. "I have an old coat in the trunk." "You could wear it over yours." He nodded once, grateful but not eager, and went to fetch it. She laid out what root vegetables she had left, planning ahead. If he caught anything, she'd make it stretch. He was gone most of the morning. She kept busy mending a tear in the curtain and boiling water for washing. When he returned, his coat was dusted in frost, and the sack slung over his back held 3 rabbits. Elira blinked. "That many," snow covers their tracks. "Makes it easier to see where they bed down." She took them without ceremony and began cleaning them behind the barn. He didn't offer to help, and she didn't ask. There were things women did in their own way, and he seemed to understand that. At dusk, she stood by the stove stirring stew thick with onion and brown meat, while Deacon sat at the table, oiling the leather lining of his gloves. "I've been thinking," he said. His voice was quiet but not uncertain. "I could put up a shelter near the barn, nothing fancy. Just enough to keep dry if the snow keeps on." She didn't look up. "You'd rather sleep outside even now," he rubbed oil into the seam. "You've got one bed. There's room by the hearth." He looked at her then. "I didn't want to assume." Elira turned, ladle in hand. "You've not assumed anything since you rode in." He nodded once, then turned back to his gloves. "I'll stay by the fire then." Later, while the stew cooled and the lantern hissed low, she poured warm water into the basin and washed her hands. Her fingers were red from the cold, cracked at the knuckles. Deacon watched her. "There's a salve in my saddlebag, elk fat and spruce. Good for that." She dried her hands. "I'll get it in the morning." He didn't press, just leaned back and stared into the fire. A long silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just wide. "I don't like owing anyone," she said at last. "You don't." "I'm not used to someone staying. Most come through, take what they need, then ride on. I'm not most." Her eyes flicked to his. "You said that before. Still true." She stood still for a long moment, then crossed the room and sat across from him. The chair creaked under her weight. "Why Cheyenne?" He rubbed his jaw. "My brother settled there. I came west after the war." "Nothing much back east worth returning to." She nodded slowly. "You fought, 3rd Missouri Cavalry. Spent most of it in Arkansas. Got out with a bullet in my leg and a hand that don't close all the way." Her eyes dropped to his left hand. She hadn't noticed before how stiff the fingers curled when he worked. "You hide it well." "Had time to learn how." The The fire popped, a sharp sound in the quiet. Elira leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I never thought I'd end up alone out here. But I can't leave this land. You don't have to explain that to me. She looked at him, and something softened between them. I'm not asking you to stay, she said, I know. But if you meant what you said about the shelter, I could use help keeping the coop from caving in. He met her gaze. I've built worse things in worse weather. She rose and gathered their bowls. Then I guess you'll be staying a little longer. He didn't smile, but something in his face shifted, a quiet acceptance. That night, he unrolled his blanket near the fire. She banked the flames low and paused by the hearth, watching the way his breath slowed as he lay back, one hand behind his head. You sleep light, she asked, always. She nodded once, then turned toward the ladder to the loft. Good night, Elira. She paused on the first rung. Good night, Deacon. The ladder creaked under her weight as she climbed. The fire below cast long shadows that danced up the walls. For the first time in months, she listened not for danger, but for the even rhythm of another breath beneath her own. The next morning, the hammering started just after sunrise. Deacon worked in silence, his breath rising in faint clouds as he sank posts and framed the lean-to against the barn's southern wall. The cold made the wood brittle, but he moved with purpose, every strike measured. From the kitchen window, Elira watched him drive a crossbeam into place. He'd taken her saw and hatchet without asking, but left them cleaned and sharpened by the door when he'd finished. She'd never seen a man treat borrowed things like they were church-owned. She ladled cornmeal mush into 2 bowls, set one aside by the fire. When she stepped outside, the wind hit hard out of the west. Deacon was trimming a plank, down on one knee, the saw moving in steady rhythm. You'll dull that blade on frozen timber, she said. He didn't look up. I'll oil it after. She stepped closer, holding out the bowl. Eat before it sets like mortar. He took it, nodding once. Thanks. She sat on the stump across from him, her hands wrapped around her own bowl. For a while, they ate without speaking. Snow creaked softly from the eaves above. I found a broken yoke near the fence, he said finally. Looks like the kind used to be hitched to oxen. It was my father's. She lowered her voice. He broke it trying to drag timber after the horse threw a shoe. Deacon didn't ask what happened after that. He let the silence stand. I could fix it, he said after a moment. It's good wood, just needs new iron. Elira looked at him. You planning on staying long enough to finish? He held her gaze. That depends. On you, she studied the hard line of his jaw, the way his shoulders squared though the wind cut like a blade. I don't make promises easy, she said. I don't ask for what I wouldn't give back. Her breath caught, not from the cold. Later, she brought out a strip of cured hide for binding and held it while he secured the joint on the yoke. His hands worked close to hers, fingers brushing now and then. Neither of them spoke about it. As dusk pressed in, she lit the lantern and brought it to the barn. Deacon had finished the shelter, 3 walls braced with salvaged beams, roof sloped low to keep snow from piling. He was inside, driving the last nail into a corner brace. She handed him the lantern. It'll hold for the night. He held the light up, inspecting the seams. Better than I expected. You've got good lumber, not much of it. He rested the hammer on the ledge. I can cut more tomorrow. East stands thick with pine. She leaned against the frame. You always build where you stop. Only where it feels like I might stop for a while. They stood in the orange glow, neither moving. My father used to say a man's worth shows in the things he leaves behind, she said. Deacon looked at her. What about a woman? She leaves what she keeps alive. He turned fully toward her then, quiet and steady. You've kept more than this place alive, Elira. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of an owl in the distance. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away. That night, a storm rolled in without warning. Snow came thick and fast, and the wind howled like something wild. Elira woke to the sound of it tugging at the shutters. She pulled her shawl tighter and crept down the ladder. The fire had gone low. Deacon was still wrapped in his blanket near the hearth, but he was awake, eyes open, watching the flames. You hear that? She whispered. Roof'll hold. She crouched beside him, feeding kindling into the ashes. I wasn't worried about the roof. He sat up slowly, blanket falling from his shoulders. Something wrong, she shook her head. Just couldn't sleep. The lantern flickered on the mantel, throwing long shadows across the walls. She didn't move to go back upstairs. He shifted, making space beside him. "Sit if you want." She hesitated, then lowered herself onto the quilt beside him. The fire popped softly, a red ember breaking loose and curling upward. "I used to think quiet was the worst kind of punishment," she said. "Now I think maybe it's the only thing that tells the truth." Deacon looked at her, his voice low. "What's it saying tonight? That I don't want to be alone anymore." He didn't reach for her, didn't move closer, but something settled between them, something even the storm couldn't shake. "You're not," he said. She turned her face toward him, and for the first time she let him see all of it, the fear, the stubbornness, the need. "I don't want someone to save me," she said. "I just want someone who sees that I've saved myself." "I see it," he said. "I see you." She didn't answer, but she stayed. The storm raged on outside, but inside the fire held, and beside it, two people sat close on the worn floor, no longer strangers, no longer waiting. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind a stillness so complete it felt sacred. Snow stacked high against the north side of the cabin, drifted up to the windows in soft, uneven folds. Light filtered through the frost-glazed panes in pale gold strokes. Elira stood at the table, sleeves rolled to her elbows, kneading dough with a steadiness that hadn't been in her hands in months. The flour had come from the sack Deacon brought, and it was the last of it, but she didn't hesitate. Across the room, Deacon worked a whetstone over the blade of her skinning knife. His sleeves were pushed to his forearms, the muscles in his wrist flexing with each pass. The room held no urgency. Only the easy rhythm of two people moving through morning. "You ever work cattle?" she asked, not looking up. "Some. Before the war, after too, mostly trail work, long drives out of Texas." She folded the dough over itself, pressing down hard. "That's a rough life. Better than stillness." "For me anyway." She turned toward him, flour dusting her cheekbone. "Stillness isn't always quiet. Sometimes it's loud in ways you don't expect." He set the knife down. "You thinking of staying still then? I've been still a long time." "I'm thinking of what comes after." Deacon stood, wiped his hands on a cloth, and leaned against the jamb of the open doorway between the kitchen and sitting room. "What would that be?" She looked at him. "I don't know yet. But I'm starting to wonder if it might not be just surviving." He nodded, eyes steady on hers. "You ever think about planting again? Spring's not far off. There's seed in the root cellar." "I was saving it in case I lived long enough to use it." "You will." They held each other's gaze for a moment longer before she turned back to the dough, folding it into a pan and setting it by the fire to rise. At midday, Deacon took the axe and disappeared into the woods. He returned with a sapling, stripped and trimmed, and began shaping it near the fence. She watched from the porch. He worked with a surety that came from years of making do, and when the sun tilted west, he carried in a new tool handle, smooth and fitted to the head of her broken hoe. She took it in her hands and gave it a small test swing over the hard, packed earth near the door. "Fits like it was made for it," she said. It was. She looked up. "You're not restless?" "I'm tired of running." She stepped closer, the hoe still in her grip. "Then stop." He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to the horizon where the land rolled out clean and white, unbroken but for fence posts and scattered pine. "I could build fence with you," he said. "Plow rows when it thaws, feed chickens. Patch your roof come spring." She tilted her head slightly. "That's not what I asked." "I know." He took a step forward until the space between them was nothing. The air smelled of pine resin and ash. Her breath came slow and even. "I don't want to be a guest," he said. "Not anymore." "You're not." His hand hovered near her waist but didn't touch. "Then tell me to stay." "You're already here," she said, voice low. He reached for her then, not rushed, not unsure, just certain. His hand settled at her back like it belonged there. She lifted her chin, eyes searching his face. "This isn't mercy," she said, "or gratitude." "I know." Then she kissed him. It wasn't shy or trembling. It was the kind of kiss that came after hard winters and harder silences, after hunger and holding on, after choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. His arms folded around her, strong and steady. She let the handle of the hoe fall to the ground. When they pulled apart, the wind rose again, lifting snow from the porch rail in a soft drift, but neither of them moved. "I want to build something that lasts," he said. "You already started." They walked back inside together. She picked up the dough. now risen high in the bowl, and set it into the cast iron to bake. He gathered the tools and put them back in the corner, not like a guest, but like a man who intended to return to them tomorrow. Outside, the world waited, quiet beneath the snow. Inside, warmth moved between them like the fire itself, not sudden, not loud, but steady. Something earned, something kept. The thaw came slow, dragging its heels through March, but by the first week of April, the last of the snow pulled back from the fence posts and left behind thick, dark mud that clung to boots and muleshoes alike. The creek began to run again, cold and quick, swollen with meltwater. Birds nested in the cottonwoods, and the wind carried the smell of damp bark and warming earth. Elira knelt by the garden bed behind the cabin, her hands caked with soil, planting seed she'd saved over 2 hard winters. Her hair was half-pinned, strands falling into her eyes. She pressed each kernel into place with care, steady and sure, even as the wind tugged at her sleeves. Deacon stood nearby, driving the last of the fence rails into the new western edge of the pasture. His shirt was open at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat darkening the fabric at his spine. "I could finish that," she said, brushing her hands on her apron. He glanced up, one hand resting on the fence rail. "You've got spring peas to mind." She wiped her brow with her wrist. "You sound like someone planning to stay through harvest." He dropped the hammer into the grass. "I thought I'd build a smokehouse next, if that's the sort of thing a person who stays does." She stood, pushing hair from her face. "I think it is." They didn't speak again until the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the field. She lit the lantern inside while he washed the dirt from his arms at the rain barrel. Supper was simple beans, wild greens, and a bit of smoked rabbit from the last catch of winter, but the table between them held more than food now. There was a rhythm, a shared quiet that didn't press. "You always this quiet when you're content?" she asked, setting her fork down. "I don't talk to fill space," he said. "Not when there's something worth being quiet in." She leaned back, eyes on him. "And is this worth being quiet in?" He nodded once. "Every day." She poured the last of the tea into their cups, the firelight casting amber across the wood. After they ate, she brought out the old quilt she'd mended through the long winter evenings, spreading it near the fire. Deacon knelt to add another log, the flame catching quick and bright. "I never thought I'd share this place," she said, folding her legs beneath her. "I never thought I'd find a place that felt like it could be mine," he said, lowering himself beside her. She studied the lines in his face, the ones the sun had deepened, the ones sorrow had carved. "You missed the trail," he shook his head slowly. "I've followed enough tracks that led nowhere." She reached for his hand, resting it in hers across the quilt. "I'm not easy. I'm not looking for easy." The fire popped, sending a thin trail of sparks up the flue. He turned her hand over in his, rough thumb brushing her knuckles. "I've been thinking," he said. "This land's enough for 2, could be more if you wanted." He paused. "A family maybe, in time." Her eyes didn't waver. "I've buried too many hopes to let one bloom without care, but I want that, with you." His fingers tightened around hers, firm and certain. "Then we'll build it." That night, they lay close beneath the patched quilt, the fire warming their legs, the wind easing against the door. There were no vows spoken, no rings slipped over fingers, but the silence between them was a promise. One forged not from words, but from shared labor, from glances that lingered, from hands that reached instead of withdrew. By late spring, the garden sprouted green rows, and the hens began to lay again. Deacon built the smokehouse from pine and riverstone, set just beyond the eastern shed. They worked side by side most days, clearing brush, hauling rock, and mending what needed mending. At night, they shared the bed beneath the loft eaves, her head tucked beneath his chin, his arms slung warm across her waist. In June, they rode to town. Elira wore a clean dress she hadn't used since her father's burial, and Deacon shaved close. They stood before the preacher in the small clapboard church, hands joined, with only the wind and the quiet townsfolk as witness. Afterward, they rode back through the grasslands, the sun warm on their backs, the sky a wide blue that stretched forever. She leaned into him as they crested the ridge, her hand resting on his thigh. "You sure you're ready for a life where morning means eggs and fence wire instead of saddling up and riding off?" she asked, He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I've never been more certain. In the years that followed, things grew." The orchard they planted took hold, and the smokehouse cured deer and turkey for winter. They built a second room onto the cabin, and when the baby came a girl with steady eyes and a quiet disposition, Elira wept into Deacon's shoulder, not from fear, but from joy so full it ached. They named her Ruth, after Elira's mother, and in time she learned to walk those same fields with a hand in each of theirs. Neighbors came by more often, the talk shifting from worry to admiration. Folks said Elira had finally found her match, and Deacon, the once drifting cowboy, had found his home, but Elira never cared for talk. She cared for the way Deacon held their daughter in the evenings, the way the fields turned gold under summer light, and the way her husband's hand found hers without searching, even after all the years. And when night fell and the fire burned low, she would lie beside him, heart steady, knowing that everything she had built, every seed planted, every fence mended, every silence shared had led her here. Together they grew old where the cottonwoods lined the creek, bound not by need but by choice. A choice made daily, in the quiet, in the work, in the warmth of a life earned and deeply kept.